I am standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that went cold hours ago, listening to my children argue about my money in the next room. Ethan wants the house. Jason keeps saying he deserves a larger share because things are tight for him right now. Melissa is crying about how much she has done for me lately. Not one of them has asked how I am doing. Not one of them has wondered if it breaks my heart to hear every word they say. And then Ethan lets out a dry laugh and says, "It's not like Mom is going to need it much longer anyway." That was the exact moment I realized something truly chilling. My children aren't wishing for me to live a long, healthy life. They are just waiting for me to pass away. But what they don't know is that I've already given every single penny away. If this story touches your heart in any way, I hope you'll stay with me until the very end. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you would do if you were in my shoes. And wherever you are watching tonight, please tell me your city and local time. I truly love reading every single one of your comments. There was a time when my family laughed around the same dinner table. Sometimes, sitting alone in my living room late at night, I try to remember when everything changed, but I can never pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe families don't shatter all at once. Maybe they fracture slowly in silence under the weight of accumulated disappointments, until one day the whole structure collapses under burden no one wanted to speak out loud. 43 years ago, Richard and I started with absolutely nothing. We were 23, newly married, living in a tiny apartment above a laundromat in Columbus, Ohio. The heat barely worked in the winter, and every time the washing machine spun downstairs, our floor shook like a minor earthquake. But I swear to you, those were the happiest years of my life. Before leaving for work each morning, Richard would kiss my forehead and say, "Someday we'll have a house full of kids and more money than we know what to do with." Back then, we had to count every penny. I worked mornings at a diner, and Richard stocked shelves at a hardware store. At night, we sat at our small kitchen table, planning our future on scraps of paper. We dreamed of owning our own business. Somehow, piece by piece, we made it happen. When Ethan was 3, Richard opened a small home goods store. I still remember standing next to him the day we unlocked the front doors for the first time. The sign read Clark's Home Supply. The letters hung slightly crooked because Richard had put them up himself. Even so, he was incredibly proud. "Gives it character," he told me with that trademark crooked smile of his. For years we worked non-stop. I kept the books and Richard managed the customers. We missed vacations. We skipped anniversaries. Some Christmas mornings were spent opening gifts at the counter because we couldn't afford to close for a single day. But we built something real and honest, and our children grew up in that store. Ethan, our oldest, was always serious. Even as a young boy, he hated to lose. If another child got a bigger piece of cake at a birthday party, Ethan noticed. If Jason was praised for something, Ethan worked twice as hard to outdo him. Still, he had a good heart back then. At least I thought he did. Melissa was pure sunshine as a little girl. She used to drape my silk scarves over her shoulders like movie star gowns, dancing down the aisles of the store. Customers adored her. She gave hugs to everyone she met. And Jason was our surprise baby, wild, loud, and completely unstoppable. Richard used to call him the little tornado. Every Friday night, no matter how busy life got, we had family dinner. Richard was strict about that. "No matter what happens," he always said, "this family sits down at the same table." For a long time we did, even after the kids grew up. Even when Ethan became an accountant in Cleveland, when Melissa married Daniel Turner and moved to the suburbs, and when Jason bounced from job to job trying to find himself, we still gathered for birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners, or at least we pretended to. Looking back, I think the real shift began after Richard got sick. It started with fatigue, then a cough, then frequent hospital visits. Soon we were hearing words like biopsy and stage 3. The doctors gave him 18 months. We only got 11. I still remember the sound of the heart monitor the night he passed. Steady 1 second and then a deafening, terrifying silence the next. People always describe grief as an explosion. To me, it felt more like drowning in total silence. After Richard passed, I sold the store. I couldn't walk those aisles anymore without hearing his voice. Benjamin Carter, our family attorney for decades and one of Richard's closest friends, handled all the paperwork. The business sold for far more than we ever expected. Combined with our savings, life insurance, and retirement accounts, I suddenly had more wealth than I had ever imagined. At first, I didn't care about the money. I was too exhausted just trying to survive. But my children noticed. At the reception after the funeral, just 3 hours after we laid Richard to rest, Ethan pulled me aside by the coffee station. "Mom," he said softly, "you really need to let me handle Dad's finances now. It's too much for someone your age." Someone your age. I remember that phrase perfectly because it strung. Not enough to make me angry at the time, but enough to stay with me. A few weeks later, Melissa started bringing up the house. "It's a lot of space for one person, you know," she said while helping me fold laundry. I forced a small smile. "It's been my home for 40 years. "I know," she replied gently. "I'm just saying you could sell it and move somewhere more manageable and smaller." Back then, I thought she was just worried about me. Now I realize she was likely calculating the property value in her head. Jason was different. Jason wasn't very good at hiding his motives. One afternoon, he showed up in expensive sneakers, asking for money to open a custom auto shop with a friend. "It's my shot, Mom," he told me. "I just need some seed money." "How much is some seed money?" I asked cautiously. 30,000. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. When I hesitated, his entire expression changed. "You have the money," he snapped. "Dad would have helped me if he were here." That line haunted me for weeks. Dad would have helped me. Maybe Richard would have. Richard believed in second chances. I used to believe in them too until I started realizing that my children no longer saw me as their mother. They saw me as an ATM, an opportunity, an inheritance waiting to be cleared. From then on, the phone calls became more frequent. Ethan always asked if I had updated my will. Melissa kept checking on my retirement accounts. Jason dropped hints about his bills and debts. Sometimes they would sit in my living room and whisper on their phones, thinking I couldn't hear them. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and heard Ethan speaking in a hushed tone. "Mom is sitting on a lot more than she realizes." I froze in the hallway. Melissa lowered her voice. "Do you know the exact number?" "Not exactly," Ethan replied, "but after the store sale it's close to 2 million. 2 million? The way he said that number made my stomach turn. Not because of the amount, but because there was no love in his voice, only greed. That night I sat alone in bed, pressing one of Richard's old flannel shirts to my chest. If I closed my eyes tight enough, I could still smell his cologne. Suddenly, I remembered something he told me years ago, after a cousin cheated him out of a business deal. "Money never changes a person," Richard had whispered. "Addison, money just exposes who they truly are." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then. I do now, and for the first time in my life I began to feel afraid of my own children. After Richard died, my house stopped feeling like a home. It became something else, a place people visited with hidden agendas. At first I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Grief twists your mind in strange ways. It makes you paranoid, emotional, and sensitive. That's what I told myself every time my kids asked uncomfortable questions about money. But deep down, I knew something had shifted completely. 3 months after the funeral, Ethan started coming over every Sunday morning. At first it comforted me. He would bring coffee from a cafe down the street and sit at the kitchen table while I made eggs and toast. For a brief moment, it felt like old times. "Just checking in on you, Mom," he would say warmly. I wanted so badly to believe him. God knows I did. But gradually I noticed the pattern. Every single visit. The conversation eventually drifted to finances. "Have you looked at Dad's retirement accounts? You really should streamline your banking. Do you know how much property taxes are going up next year?" One morning, while I was pouring coffee, Ethan pulled a folder from his leather briefcase. "I actually put together a list of investment options for you," he said, trying to sound casual. I stared at the documents, charts, numbers, projected returns. "You did this for me?" I asked quietly. "Of course," he replied. "I just don't want anyone taking advantage of you." The irony almost made me laugh out loud, but I kept quiet. Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "You know, Mom, at your age, managing an estate this size on your own is risky." There it was again, at your age, as if growing older automatically erased my ability to think. "I'm managing just fine," I told him gently. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he forced another smile. "I know you think you are." That phrase bothered me long after he left. "I know you think you are, not you are, just you think you are," as if my mind was already slipping. Melissa's approach was different. She wrapped her manipulation in layers of concern. She started calling every night around 7:00 p.m. Mom, did you eat dinner? Are you taking your vitamins? You sound tired. Sometimes she would cry about how much she missed Dad, and every time she did, I felt guilty for doubting her intentions. Until the afternoon, she showed up with a stack of brochures: retirement communities, assisted living facilities, luxury senior apartments. She spread them across my dining table like a real estate agent. Look how beautiful these places are, Mom, she said brightly. No stairs, no yard work, 24-hour security. I looked down at the glossy photos: swimming pools, communal lounges, tiny kitchens, tiny bedrooms, tiny lives. I like my house, I said softly. Melissa let out a dramatic sigh. Mom, this house is huge. It's just not practical for you to be here alone anymore. This house is where your father asked me to marry him. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but it lasted only a second. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. Well, memories don't pay for roof repairs. I looked at her in disbelief. Was this really my daughter? The little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms? The child who cried for 2 hours when her goldfish died? I wanted to ask her what happened to make her this way, but I was afraid of the answer. At least Jason was honest about needing money. It made him slightly easier to read. Slightly. He started showing up unannounced, sometimes late at night, sometimes smelling faintly of alcohol, sometimes pretending everything was fine. One evening I was making soup when he walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge as if he still lived here. Any sandwich meat? He asked. In the drawer. He slapped some turkey onto bread, talking a mile a minute about a business venture. Apparently his friend Trevor wanted to open a custom auto shop. According to Jason, it was a guaranteed goldmine. I just need a loan to get started, he said. I'll pay you back with interest. How much? I asked cautiously. 50,000. I nearly choked. Jason. Come on, Mom, he interrupted. You can afford it. That's not the point. His expression turned instantly dark. Then what is the point? The point is you borrowed money last year. That was different. And you never paid it back. He slammed the refrigerator door, rattling the magnets on the front. You always treat Uthan like he's some financial genius, he snapped. But the second I ask for help, you assume I'm irresponsible. That's not true. It is true. His face was flushed with anger. You have all this money just sitting around and I'm drowning. In that moment I felt something break inside me. It wasn't that he needed help, it was the resentment in his voice, as if my existence owed him something. I'm your mother, I said, my voice trembling, not your bank. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Then Jason let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, you're not doing a very good job at being a mother either. That comment cut deeper than he probably intended, or maybe it did exactly what he wanted. He walked out without saying goodbye. After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at a bowl of soup I hadn't touched. I cried harder that night than I had in months, not because of the insult, but because deep down, I realized my children weren't coming to see me anymore. They were coming to see what they could take from me. The saddest part was how it slowly became normal. Uthan organized my bills by looking through my mail. Melissa prud into my savings accounts. Jason only called when another collector was at his door. Even holidays felt different. That Thanksgiving, I spent hours cooking for 12 people while dealing with painful arthritis. Oliver, Melissa's daughter, helped me in the kitchen for hours without a single complaint, but the others treated me like I was barely there. Uthan and Jason argued about real estate values across the table. Melissa complained about the cost of Oliver's brother's college tuition. Every conversation eventually looped back to money, every single one. At one point, I walked into the hallway carrying an empty serving dish and overheard Uthan whispering to Melissa by the stairs. Mom is sitting on a goldmine right now. Melissa kept her voice low. Do you know exactly how much Benjamin handled the store sale? Uthan said, based on market estimates, after taxes and investments it's close to 2 million. 2 million? They spoke so coldly, like accountants discussing inventory, not children discussing their mother's life savings. Then Uthan said something that changed me forever. Shrugging casually, he muttered, we just need to make sure she doesn't start giving it away to outsiders. I froze behind the hallway wall, my heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears, because suddenly I understood something terrifying. They weren't worried about me losing my money, they were worried about losing their access to it. That night after everyone left, I wandered through the dark house, turning off lights one by one. The silence was unbearable. I stopped in Richard's old study, sitting in his leather chair, surrounded by framed family photos of Hupuk times. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, real smiles from days when love felt uncomplicated. I picked up a photo of Richard holding Melissa as a little girl, with Uthan standing beside them grinning proudly. Jason was just a baby. We looked so happy, so safe. I pressed the photo to my chest, whispering through tears, "What happened to us?" But the room remained completely silent, and for the first time in my life, I began to wonder if my children even loved me at all. I used to love birthdays. When the kids were young, I would stay up until midnight baking cakes because we couldn't afford a bakery. Richard would string up crooked banners in the dining room, pretending to be a professional party planner. Back then, the house always felt warm and alive. But my 68th birthday felt different from the moment I woke up. The silence in the house carried a heavy weight, as if something unpleasant was waiting for me before the day even started. Still, I tried. God knows I tried. I spent the whole day working in the kitchen. Beef roast in the oven, hummus mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and Melissa's favkrata peach pie. I even polished Richard's old silver because he always insisted birthdays deserved real forks. By 6:00 p.m., the dining room looked beautiful. Candlelight cast a soft glow on the walls, and the shelves were packed with family photos. Standing there alone in my dark blue dress, I almost convinced myself that things could be normal again. Then the front door opened, and reality arrived. Uthan and his wife Carol were the first to show up. He gave me a brief, distracted hug before pulling out his phone to check work emails. "Happy birthday, Mom," he muttered absently. Melissa arrived 20 minutes later, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers with the price tag still attached. Jason was the last to appear, late again. When he kissed my cheek, I caught the faint smell of whiskey. "Sorry," he said, "traffic." No one believed that anymore. At first, dinner went smoothly enough. We talked about the weather, Oliver's new job at a Pudoet truck clinic, football and gas prices. Safe topics. The kind of conversation used to fill the silence when a family is desperately avoiding the truth sitting in the middle of the table. I noticed Oliver watching me closely throughout dinner. Unlike the others, she actually cared. Every time my water glass was empty, she quietly refilled it. When my arthritis started acting up, she took over serving the dishes without me even having to ask. Small things, but after months of feeling invisible, that kindness felt enormous. Halfway through dessert, Uthan leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. "This house really needs some work," he said, looking around the dining room as if making a casual observation. My stomach instantly tightened. Melissa shot him a look. "Uthan." "What?" he shrugged. "I'm just being realistic." Jason snorted into his beer bottle. "He's right. The kitchen alone probably needs $30,000 in upgrades." I set my fork down slowly. "The house is fine." Uthan gave me the kind of patient smile people use with stubborn children. "Mom, the market is changing. If you ever decide to sell, you have to do the renovations first." There it was again. Selling, always the money. Melissa wiped her mouth with a napkin and spoke softly. "To be fair, Mom, maybe downsizing isn't a bad idea." I stared at her. "Even you." "Oh, don't take it like that," she shot back quickly. "We're just worried about you managing this place alone." Jason laughed coldly. "No offense, but Uthan is probably more worried about the property value." Uthan's expression hardened. "At least I'm responsible with finances." "Oh, please," Jason sneered. "You've probably already measured the windows for new curtains." "Better than begging Mom for a handout every 6 months. Jason slammed his beer bottle onto the table. "You think because you wear a suit and say words like portfolio, you deserve everything." "I think I earned my success." Melissa broke in immediately. "This is exactly why Mom needs a clear will." The room went completely dead. Even Oliver stopped moving. I felt a sharp ache in my chest. "A will," I repeated quietly. Melissa looked uncomfortable for a split second before pressing forward. Well, yes, I mean, it's something that needs to be discussed eventually. On my birthday at my table, while I am still sitting here. Uthan nodded slowly. She's right, Mom. Honestly, it avoids a lot of mess later on. Mess, what a polite word for greed. Jason pointed his bottle at Uthan. Oh, you'd love to see a will, wouldn't you? You've probably already divided the money in your head. At least I don't have a massive mortgage. Uthan pushed his chair back violently, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. You think you're better than me? I think Dad would be ashamed of you, Uthan said coldly. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Jason was halfway out of his seat. Melissa was standing up, yelling at both of them to stop. Carol stared down at her plate, pretending nothing was happening. And me, I just sat there, watching my children fight over the remaining pieces of my life like vultures over an inheritance. Then, Uthan said something that utterly shattered any hope I had left. We all know Mom isn't going to be living here forever anyway. The sentence hit me so hard I couldn't catch my breath for a moment. Not living here forever, as if my passing was simply an upcoming business transaction. Olivia suddenly stood up. Enough. All eyes turned to her, her voice was shaking with anger. She is sitting right here. Melissa looked embarrassed. Olivia, stay out of adult business. No, Olivia snapped, refusing to back down. You're talking about Grandma like she's already gone. Silence consumed the room. Jason looked away first. Uthan rubbed his jaw, irritated, but no one apologized, not one of them. I slowly pushed my chair away from the table. I think I'm tired, I said quietly. Melissa instantly put on a fake mask of concern. Mom, are you okay? I almost laughed. The performance was insulting at this point. I just need some air. I walked into the kitchen before anyone could see the tears in my eyes. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. From the dining room, I could still hear the muffled sounds of Ugwang. Uthan's voice, Jason snapping back, Melissa trying to mediate. Not one of them came after me. Except Olivia. A minute later she walked into the kitchen quietly, carrying my untouched slice of birthday cake. She sat down next to me and didn't say a word at first. Then she gently took my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. That phrase nearly broke me. Not because of the apology, but because she was the only person in that house who understood that an apology was needed. I looked down at the cake, my vision blurring. I don't understand what happened, I admitted softly. Oliver squeezed my hand. You didn't do anything wrong, Grandma. But I wondered if I had. Maybe Richard and I spent so many years giving them everything they wanted that they never learned how to be grateful. Maybe love without boundaries just turns into entitlement. Maybe we raised successful adults but failed to raise kind people. A little while later, Oliver helped me clean up the kitchen while the others left the house one by one. No one brought up the argument again. Uthan left first without even a goodbye hug. Melissa kissed my cheek and said, "Try not to overexert yourself." Jason vanished without a sound. By 10:30 p.m. the house was silent again. Oliver stayed to help me pack the leftovers. Before she left, she gave me a tight hug at the front door. I love you, she whispered. It was the first time all evening I believed someone meant those words. After she left, I locked the front door and stood alone in the dark hallway. The birthday candles had burned down to puddles of melted wax. Half-empty glasses were left scattered across the table. The house smelled of cold food and disappointment. I slowly sat down in Richard's old chair, staring at the family photos on the wall. Then I whispered the words that changed everything. I can't leave our life's work to them. And deep down, I think that was the exact moment my final plan truly took shape. For 3 days after that birthday dinner, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Uthan's voice all over again. Mom isn't going to be living here forever anyway. It played on a loop in my mind like a broken record. I tried to distract myself with chores, doing laundry, working in the garden, watching old TV shows Richard used to love. Nothing worked. The house felt different now. Not lonely but unsafe. Not because I feared my children would physically hurt me, but because I finally understood a painful truth. They had already prepared for my passing, and somewhere deep inside, they had started viewing my life as an asset to be liquidated. On the 4th morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat alone at the kitchen table, holding a cup of tea that was slowly growing cold. A photograph of Richard sat right next to the coffee maker. I stared at his face for a long time. You always saw people for who they were, I whispered softly. I just refused to see it. Then I picked up the phone. Benjamin Carter answered on the second ring. Benjamin speaking. It's Addison. His voice warmed instantly. Oh, hello, Addie. No one had called me Addie since Richard passed. Just hearing the nickname brought tears to my eyes. You sound tired, Benjamin said gently. I need to speak with you. His tone shifted immediately. What's wrong? I looked toward the empty dining room before unsung. My children. That was all it took. Benjamin let out a soft sigh. Come to my office at noon. Benjamin's law firm was located on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. Richard used to joke that the place smelled like expensive paper and regret. Remarkably, it still did. When I walked in, Benjamin stood up from his desk immediately. At 72, he moved a bit slower than he used to, but his eyes were sharp. He gave me a tight hug. For a dangerous second, I felt like breaking down entirely right there in his arms. But I forced myself to sit down. Benjamin poured coffee without asking how I took it. After 40 years of friendship, he knew my routine. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. The familiar gesture brought a sharp ache to my heart. My own children barely remembered how I took my coffee. Benjamin sat in the chair across from me. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the birthday dinner, the ugwang, the discussions about the house, the pressure from Uthan, Jason's demands for money, and the retirement home brochures Melissa had brought over. As I spoke, Benjamin's expression grew increasingly grim. When I finished, the office was dead silent. Finally, he leaned back heavily in his chair. I was afraid this might happen, he admitted softly. I looked up sharply. You noticed too. Benjamin hesitated before unsung. Uthan started calling me after Richard passed. My stomach tightened instantly. What? He was just asking standard questions at first, Benjamin explained cautiously. About estate taxes, probate laws, trust structures. I stared at him in disbelief. How long ago? About 6 months after the funeral. 6 months, not even a full year after Richard was gone. A wave of nausea hit me. Benjamin took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking exhausted. I didn't tell you because I hoped I was reading too much into it. But you weren't. No, he said quietly, I wasn't. Silence fell over the room again. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. These hands had packed school lunches. They had sewn Halloween costumes. They had worked 16-hour days alongside Richard just to build a future for our kids. And after all of that, this was where we ended up. Benjamin finally leaned forward. What do you want to do? I swallowed hard. I want to protect what Richard and I built. He searched my face carefully. You mean changing your estate plan? Yes. Benjamin nodded slowly but didn't respond right away. I appreciated that about him. He never rushed through a difficult conversation. You understand, he said gently, that if you make a significant change now, your children could react very poorly. I let out a bitter laugh. They're already reacting poorly. No, Addie, I mean legally. That gave me pause. Benjamin crossed his hands. If you leave the bulk of your estate elsewhere, Ethan especially might try to challenge your mental capacity. A cold chill ran down my spine. You think my own son would try to prove I'm incompetent? Benjamin didn't answer right away. The silence spoke for itself. I turned to look out the office window. Outside, people in downtown Columbus were walking past with coffee cups and briefcases, living normal lives. And here I was, sitting in a lawyer's office, discussing whether my own children would try to erase my dignity for money. How did my life turn into this? I'm not confused, I whispered softly. I'm very clear. I know, Benjamin replied immediately, but courts can be ugly. Greed makes people cruel. I thought about the calculating look in Ethan's eyes, Jason's anger, Melissa's rehearsed concern, and suddenly I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I passed away tomorrow without any protection in place, my children would tear each other apart over every dollar Richard and I left behind. Maybe they already were. Benjamin slid a folder across the desk. What are my choices? I asked. For the next hour we discussed everything. trusts, asset transfers, charitable foundations, medical powers of attorney, legal safeguards. The entire conversation felt surreal, as if I wasn't dealing with my own estate, but rather planning an elaborate escape. Midway through, Benjamin stopped and looked directly at me. "You don't have to decide today." "No," I said quietly, "I do." He frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because if I wait, the guilt might stop me. Because mothers are conditioned to forgive indefinitely. Because a broken part of me still wants to believe they'll wake up and be kind again. But mostly because I finally recognize a terrible truth. If I keep protecting my children from the consequences of their actions, they will never become better people." I took a deep breath, my voice trembling slightly. Richard and I spent a lifetime helping them. Somehow it only taught them to demand more. Benjamin nodded sadly. "It's more common than you think." I looked down at the documents spread across the desk. "So, if I decide to transfer these assets, can it be done quietly?" "Yes." "How long does it take?" "Depending on the structure, fairly quickly." I hesitated before asking the question that changed everything. What if I wanted this money to actually help people? Benjamin looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean real help," I said softly. "Not funding luxury vacations, not upgrading to larger kitchens, not feeding more greed." My voice caught in my throat. "I want Richard's life's work to mean something more than this." Benjamin stared at me for a long time, then his expression softened. "There are organizations that specialize in helping older women who have been abandoned by their families," he said cautiously. "Housing programs, emergency support services." The phrase hit me harder than expected. Abandoned by their families. It carried a heavy weight because deep down that's exactly how I felt. Benjamin pulled a brochure from a cabinet for a local outreach center. The Diane Miller Community Outreach Project, helping older women rebuild secure lives. I stared at the photo on the cover. An elderly woman was smiling faintly while a volunteer helped her with groceries. Something deep inside me began to shift. Not a sense of relief, not yet, but it was enough. Benjamin watched me carefully. "You're considering this?" "Yes," I admitted. He brought his hands together. "Addie, before you make any permanent decisions, I have to ask you one honest question." I nodded slowly. "Are you doing this because you're angry?" I thought about that birthday dinner, the greedy expressions, the indifference, the entitlement. Then I thought about Richard, a man who worked himself to exhaustion to ensure the people he loved were secure. Tears spilled over my cheeks. "No," I whispered. Looking directly at Benjamin, I said the truest words I had spoken in months. "I'm doing this because I finally understand that my children don't value the sacrifices we made to give them everything." The office went completely still. Benjamin nodded. Then he opened a fresh legal file and wrote my name across the front, Addison Clark. And from that moment on, my final plan was officially set in motion. A week after my meeting with Benjamin, I drove to the Diane Miller Community Outreach Project for the first time. The building sat on the edge of an older neighborhood just outside downtown Columbus. It wasn't fancy. The brick walls were faded, and the sign near the entrance was peeling at the edges, but the place felt warm and genuine. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, hesitating to get out. Part of me still wasn't sure why I was there. Maybe I just needed perspective. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't overreacting to my own children. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew I was on the brink of a decision that would alter my family forever. When I finally stepped out, a chilly breeze swept across the parking lot. Inside, the center smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. The lobby walls were lined with bulletin boards offering free legal clinics, food pantries, and emergency housing. A young volunteer behind the desk smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Diane Miller," I said quietly. A few minutes later, Diane walked down the hallway, carrying a stack of files. She looked close to my age, early 70s, with silver hair pulled back into a casual bun and tired, kind eyes. "You must be Addison," she said warmly. "Benjamin called me." Of course he had. Benjamin always prepared the ground before dropping someone into an emotional storm. Diane shook my hand gently. "Come with me." She guided me through the building, slowly explaining how the center operated. The emergency housing, the meal programs, the medical assistance, the support groups for older adults left with nowhere else to turn. The words hit me harder than expected. Left with nowhere else to turn. I still struggled to hear that without feeling guilty, as if admitting to emotional abandonment was somehow betraying my children. Diane opened the door to a common room where several older women were sitting together, drinking tea. Some watched TV quietly, others knitted or played cards. At first glance, the room seemed peaceful, but I started noticing the details, the sadness in their eyes, the loneliness hidden behind forced smiles. One woman sat by the window, clutching a picture frame so tightly her knuckles were white. Another stared blankly into her coffee cup, as if she had forgotten where she was. Diane lowered her voice. Most of these women have families. That surprised me. They do. She nods slowly. They have children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. Then why are they here? Diane's expression dims with exhaustion, because families don't always stay kind. Those words hit my heart with a heavy, painful weight. One of the women notices us standing by the door and forces a small smile. "Are you volunteering today?" she asks me. Her name is Gloria. She is 76, a former elementary school teacher with 3 children and 7 grandchildren. As we talk, she shows me a photograph from years ago, showing her children laughing on Santa's lap at Christmas. "They used to call me every single week," she says softly. I swallow hard. "What happened?" Gloria shrugs sadly. "I guess life just changed them." But later, as Diane walks me down another hallway, she quietly explains the truth. After Gloria's husband passed, her son convinced her to sign some financial documents. Within a year, most of her savings were gone. Eventually, her son completely stopped answering her calls. I stop walking. "You mean he took everything?" Diane's eyes are filled with a weary understanding. It happens far more often than people realize. My stomach knots in pain. Suddenly, Ethan's face flashes through my mind. Those investment charts, the pressure, the constant questioning about my accounts. A cold shiver runs through me. Further down the hall, I meet another woman named Patricia. She and her husband used to run a successful bakery. Now, she is living in temporary housing because her daughter sold her house out from under her during a custody dispute. "She told everyone I was confused," Patricia whispers, her trembling hands folding a tissue over and over as she chokes back tears. "But I wasn't confused, I was just grieving." Hearing her say that makes me catch my breath. For the first time, I realize how easily grief can be used as a weapon against older adults. An accusation, a signature, a court proceeding, and suddenly your entire life belongs to someone else. By lunchtime, I am emotionally drained. Diane brings me a cup of coffee in her small office at the back of the building. For a long time, neither of us says a word. Finally, I ask softly, "How do these women survive this?" Diane looks out toward the hallway. "Some of them don't." The blunt honesty of her answer breaks my heart. Leaning back heavily in her chair, she sighs. "The hardest part isn't actually losing the money," she continues. "It's the realization that the people you sacrificed everything to provide for no longer see you as a human being." Tears instantly burn my eyes because she is exactly right. It isn't about the money. It isn't about the inheritance. It's about human dignity. I think back to my birthday dinner, where my own children discussed my property right in front of me as if I had already ceased to exist. Diane watches me closely. "You're going through something similar, aren't you?" For a second, I want to deny it. Mothers are conditioned to protect their children's image at all costs, even when those children stop protecting us. But something deep inside me finally breaks completely. "Yes," I whisper. Once I start talking, I can't stop. I tell her about Ethan, Melissa, and Jason, the constant pressure, their sense of entitlement, and the quiet fear that has been growing inside me. By the end, tears are streaming down my face. Diane hands me a tissue without a hint of judgment. Then she says something that changes me forever. "Addison, you have every right to protect yourself." I just stare at her. No one has ever said that to me before, not once, because mothers are expected to give endlessly no matter the cost, no matter how much it destroys us. Diane leans forward gently. "Loving your children doesn't mean sacrificing your own dignity." Those words strike me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For months I have been drowning in guilt. Guilt for doubting my kids. Guilt for feeling hurt. guilt even for considering changing my will. But sitting in that cramped little office, surrounded by women who have lost everything, I suddenly realize that guilt is the exact thing that keeps people trapped. Later, Diane shows me the center's newest project, a small housing unit that is still being renovated. The hallways are stacked with paint cans, and several rooms remain unfinished due to a lack of funding. "We are trying to build permanent transitional housing," she explains, "a safe haven for women who have nowhere else to go." I slowly step into one of the unfinished rooms. There is a simple bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the parking lot. Yet somehow, this place feels filled with more hope than the fear I've been living with in my own home. "What happens if the funding runs out?" I ask quietly. Diane smiles sadly. "Then we do what we've always done." "What's that?" "Pray that kindness finds us in time." That phrase stays with me all the way back to my house. That night, I sit alone in Richard's old study once again. The house is dead silent except for the grandfather clock ticking by the stairs. I stare at our family photos for a long time, and a thought crosses my mind that makes my heart ache. What if Richard's money could become a shelter instead of a breeding ground for greed? What if our life's work could be used to protect people, instead of ruining our children? For the first time since Richard passed, the answer is incredibly painful, yet perfectly clear. The next morning I call Benjamin Carter. When he answers, I don't hesitate for a single second. "I'm ready," I tell him. There is a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he asks softly, "Are you sure, Addie?" I look around my empty kitchen at the family photos at this house built on sacrifice and love, and finally I answer through my tears, "Yes." Because deep down, I have already decided to give all the money away. The moment I make that final decision, something strange changes inside me. I become calmer, not happier, and the hurt isn't gone, but I feel at peace. For months I have been trapped between guilt and fear, constantly second-guessing myself. Was I being unfair? Was grief making me paranoid? Was I overreacting to harmless conversations? But after visiting Diane's center, the fog finally clears. I am not losing my mind. My children have truly begun to view me as an asset rather than a person. And now that I know the truth, I see everything much more clearly, especially Ethan. 2 weeks after Benjamin, and I sign the first round of legal documents, on a Tuesday afternoon, Ethan shows up unannounced. I am watering the plants on the front porch when his black SUV pulls into the driveway. He gets out wearing an expensive grey coat, holding the leather briefcase he brings with him every single time now. In the past 40 years, I have never seen my son carry a briefcase to visit his mother, not until money entered our conversations. "Mom," he calls out warmly, "it's freezing out here, you should have told me." I force a small smile. "I'm not that fragile, Ethan." He chuckles softly, but his eyes are already scanning the property. The porch, the windows, the roof, calculating, always calculating. In the kitchen, I brew coffee while Ethan sits at the table checking emails on his phone. "You've been busy with work lately," I say. "There's a major merger coming up." A silence settles between us. When he was a child, this kind of silence used to feel comfortable. Now it feels tense, artificial. Finally, Ethan closes his phone and leans forward. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." There it is again, that performative tone, soft, controlled, full of concern. I keep stirring the cream in my coffee, even though it doesn't need it. "That's nice of you." "I mean it, Mom. Ever since Dad passed, I've been worried about you living here all by yourself." I nod slowly but stay quiet. Ethan reaches into his briefcase and pulls out several documents. My chest instantly tightens. "What is that?" "Nothing bad," he says quickly. "In fact, it's for your own protection." Of course, it is always for my protection. He slides the papers toward me. It is a power of attorney document. I look down at the papers in silence. "You want control over my finances?" "No," he answers much too fast. "Not control, just assistance, just in case anything happens, so we're prepared." I slowly look up. "What exactly do you think is going to happen to me?" Ethan lets out a dramatic sigh. "Mom, please don't do this." "Do what? Act like I'm being cornered." I almost want to laugh at the irony. His voice becomes even softer. "You're 68 years old. If there's an emergency, someone needs to have the legal authority to handle things for you." I stare at my son for a long time, then ask quietly, "Why you?" The question completely catches him off guard. "What? Why does it have to be you?" His jaw tightens just a fraction. "Because I'm the oldest." "That's not a reason." For a split second, a flash of coldness crosses his eyes. Then the mask slips back into place. "Because I'm the financially responsible one, Mom." There it is, not out of care but because of his qualifications, as if he is applying for ownership. I slowly push the documents back across the table. "I'm not signing anything today." Ethan's smile vanishes. "You don't trust me." It is an emotional guilt trip, exactly as expected. "I didn't say that." "But that's what you mean." I take a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I mean I need time to think." Ethan leans back in his chair, clearly starting to get frustrated. "Mom, people your age get manipulated all the time." That phrase sends a chill right through me. People your age, there it is again, as if my age automatically makes me incompetent. "I am still fully capable of making my own decisions," I say calmly. "No one is saying you aren't, but his tone says otherwise." The conversation hits a wall. Ethan stays for another 20 minutes, forcing awkward small talk before finally packing up his documents. As he reaches the front door, he pauses. "Just remember," he says cautiously, "not everyone around you has good intentions." I almost ask him if he realizes how ironic that sounds, but I say nothing and simply nod. The moment his SUV disappears down the street, I lock the front door and lean against it, trembling. Not from fear, but from a broken heart. Because for the first time I truly believe that Ethan already sees himself as the master of my future. And somehow, things only get worse from there. Melissa starts calling constantly, sometimes twice a day. At first she sounds incredibly affectionate. "I've been thinking about you all morning, I miss you. You should let me come over and help you organize the house." But beneath every conversation lies the same unsaid question: how much money do you still have control over? One evening she shows up unannounced for dinner. She comes in with soup and a fake smile. "You look exhausted," she says the moment she walks in. "I'm fine." "No, really, you just look so tired." Those comments deeply unnerve me. Throughout dinner she watches me far too closely, studying me, analyzing me. At one point she asks casually, "Have you been forgetting things lately?" I nearly drop my spoon. "What?" "Oh, nothing serious," she says quickly. "You just repeated the same story twice on the phone yesterday." I stare at her. I hadn't repeated anything, not once. A slow, terrifying realization washes over me. She is testing a narrative, planting seeds of doubt. It is the exact tactic Patricia warned me about at Diane's center. A cold dread settles over me. Later that evening, while I am washing dishes, Melissa slips into Richard's old study. When I follow her in, she is staring intently at the locked filing cabinet where financial records used to be kept. "Oh," she says quickly, turning around, "I was just looking for a pen." A pen in a locked filing cabinet. I force a polite smile anyway. This acting is draining the life out of me. Then comes Jason. Jason doesn't manipulate quietly like Ethan or Melissa. Jason explodes. Just after 10:00 p.m. on a Friday night, he shows up intoxicated. The sharp smell of alcohol hits me the moment I open the door. "Jason." "I need help," he interrupts immediately. I reluctantly step aside. His eyes are bloodshot and he looks completely exhausted and desperate. In that vulnerable moment my heart softens, because no matter what, he is still my son. He collapses heavily onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I'm ruined, Mom." I sit across from him carefully. "What happened?" "The shop business fell through." I close my eyes briefly. I can't say I'm surprised. "I owe people money." "How much?" Jason hesitates, then mutters, "Close to 80,000. The number hits me like a physical blow. "Jason." I know, his voice shakes. I know. For several seconds, neither of us says anything. Then he looks up at me with tears in his eyes. "You can fix this." There it is again, not asking for help but demanding a fix, as if my money exists solely to rescue him from his own choices. "I can't keep fixing things for you," I say softly. Jason's entire face changes instantly. Anger replaces his sadness so quickly it frightens me. So that's it then. That's not what I mean. You have millions sitting in the bank, you have retirement savings, you have enough money to last 10 lifetimes. His voice echoes through the house. I feel myself shaking. Lower your voice. No, he yells. Dad would never have turned his back on me like this. That comment pierces straight through me. He knows exactly where to strike to cause the most pain. I slowly stand up from my chair. Your father would also never want to see you showing up drunk and buried in debt. Jason glares at me with pure resentment. Then he says something I will never forget for the rest of my life. You care more about your money than your own children. The silence that follows is unbearable, because deep down I realize my children truly believe my money already belongs to them, and that is what terrifies me the most. After Jason leaves, I sit alone in the dark house, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the quiet. Then I finally admit to myself what I've been avoiding for months. My children are no longer asking for love, they are demanding ownership, and I know this storm is only just beginning. 3 days after Jason shouted at me in my living room, Ethan calls again. His voice sounds unusually cheerful. Mom, I was thinking we could grab some lunch together tomorrow. I want to say no almost immediately, but something stops me. Maybe it is curiosity, maybe instinct, or perhaps a broken part of me still holds onto a shred of hope that my son will finally speak to me like a person, rather than a financial opportunity. So I agree. Around 11:00 a.m. the next morning, Ethan picks me up in his SUV. Rain taps gently against the windows as we drive through downtown Columbus. For the first few minutes, the conversation stays perfectly safe: traffic, the weather, a new restaurant near his office. But Ethan seems distracted and nervous. He checks the clock on the dashboard every few seconds. You seem busy, I say cautiously. Just a packed schedule today, he forces a smile. Thanks for coming out with me. Coming out where? He glances at me quickly. To the bank. My stomach instantly tightens. The bank. Relax, Mom, he chuckles lightly. I just need to make a quick stop for a few minutes and then we'll get lunch. I should have trusted my instincts right then, but mothers spend a lifetime trying to see the best in their children, even when the evidence is heartbreaking. The bank is located in a modern glass building downtown. Ethan parks near the entrance, quickly hurrying around to open my door like an attentive, dutiful son. The performance is almost breathtaking. Inside, the air smells of polished marble and expensive perfume. A young bank employee greets us immediately. Good afternoon, Mr. Clark. So this was arranged in advance. Of course it was. Ethan places a hand gently on my back, guiding me into a private office. This won't take long. I say nothing. The employee introduces herself as Amanda and gives me a warm smile. It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Clark. I nod politely. For several minutes, Ethan does all the talking, too much talking. He explains how worried he is about me managing my finances alone, how overwhelming estate planning can be, and how older clients often need a family support structure to help them. Every sentence sounds carefully rehearsed. Amanda finally turns to me. Mrs. Clark, how do you feel about all of this? There is a genuine quality to her tone, a sharp observation. I suddenly realize she is studying me very closely. She likely has training for this because in places like this, financial exploitation of older adults happens every day. Before I can answer, Ethan smoothly cuts in. My mother has been under a lot of pressure since my father passed away. Pressure, not grief, not a broken heart, pressure, making it sound like I am an unstable client who is slowly losing her edge. Amanda nods professionally. That is completely understandable. At that moment, Ethan pulls several forms from his folder. There they are, exactly like the ones that were on my kitchen table. Power of attorney, account access authorization. The signature lines are even marked with yellow sticky tabs. My pulse begins to throb loudly in my ears. Ethan, I say softly, I told you I wasn't ready to sign those. His smile stiffens instantly. We're just looking at options. No, I reply calmly. You brought me here to make me sign these. Amanda's eyes move between us. The temperature in the room feels like it just dropped. Ethan lowers his voice, clearly trying to maintain a sense of control. Mom, please don't make this complicated. Complicated, the word feels like an insult, as if protecting myself makes me a nuisance. I slowly fold my hands in my lap. I am not signing anything today. Ethan stares at me, then his expression shifts. It isn't anger yet, it's frustration. The kind of frustration people feel when a business deal falls through. He leans forward. Mom, this isn't wise. Amanda intervenes gently. Mrs. Clark has every right to take some time to think about it. Ethan completely ignores her. Turning back to me, he says, "You don't understand how messy these things can get." "I understand perfectly." "Do you?" His tone sharpens. "Because you've been acting very paranoid lately." That word stuns me. Paranoid, there it is. The exact narrative Melissa started planting. I look directly at my son. "You think I'm paranoid?" "I think grief is affecting your judgment." Amanda shifts uncomfortably beside us. I notice her expression change too. It turns into concern, genuine concern, not for me but about Ethan. Ethan realizes it too, but it's too late. His voice softens immediately. "Mom, I'm just trying to protect the family." Protect the family, as if I am already excluded from it. I look down at the documents silently. Then I ask the question that has been burning in my mind for months. Protect the family or protect the money? The silence that follows is deafening. Uthan's jaw is locked tight. Amanda looks away awkwardly, and in that moment Uthan's mask finally slips. Not completely, but enough. "You're being emotional," Uthan mutters under his breath. I stare at him in disbelief. Emotional? After carrying him for 9 months? After working back-to-back jobs to pay for his college tuition? After staying up all night by his bedside when he had childhood fevers? Now I am simply dismissed as emotional. I slowly push the documents back across the desk. "No." Uthan blinks. "What?" "No," I repeat calmly. "I am not signing anything." The air in the room turns freezing cold. For a few seconds Uthan says nothing, then his entire demeanor changes. The warmth is gone, the patience is gone, all that's left is irritation. "You're making a mistake." Amanda finally steps in firmly. "Mr. Clark, perhaps it would be best to continue this discussion another day." Uthan completely disregards her. "You have no idea how vulnerable you are right now," he tells me. I feel something harden inside me, not anger but clarity. I am vulnerable because my children think my life belongs to them. The impact of that statement is larger than I expected. Even Amanda looks shocked. Uthan stares at me like I am a complete stranger. Suddenly he lets out a cold laugh. "You know what your problem is?" I don't answer. "You're wasting money that belongs in this family." The words ring out in the office. Just like that, everything becomes completely transparent. It isn't care, it isn't love, it is ownership. This whole time it was always about that. Amanda looks genuinely appalled now. "Mr. Clark." But Uthan stands up abruptly, grabbing the papers from the desk. "Forget it." He shoves the folder back into his briefcase, visibly furious. I remain seated, perfectly still. In fact, I am strangely calm, because the worst part wasn't hearing the words, it was the realization that he truly meant them. He really believes my money is already his. Amanda turns to me gently. "Mrs. Clark, are you all right?" Looking into her kind eyes, I almost cry with relief, because a total stranger has shown me more respect in 10 minutes than my own son has in months. "Yes," I whisper softly, "I think I finally am." On the drive back, Uthan doesn't say a single word. The atmosphere inside the SUV is suffocating. Halfway there, he speaks up suddenly without looking at me. "Is someone influencing you? This doesn't sound like you." I almost laugh, because what he really means is, this doesn't sound like the person I can control. When we return to my house, Uthan cuts the engine but doesn't unlock the doors right away. "You're pushing your family away," he says quietly. I look through the windshield at the front porch Richard built with his own hands. Then I reply softly, "No, Uthan, my family left a long time ago." For a split second, a flash of something almost human crosses his face. Maybe guilt, maybe shame, but it vanishes quickly. He unlocks the doors. I get out without saying another word. Walking inside, I stand alone in the hallway, listening to the silence settle around me. Then, I slowly walk into Richard's old study and open the locked drawer containing my updated legal documents. I look down at the transfer confirmations, the charitable trust paperwork, and the completed signatures. The majority of the money is now moved, legally protected and untouchable. For the first time in months, I feel safe, because while my children are still fighting over my wealth, they have no idea I've already taken it away from them. For a few nights after the incident at the bank, I can't sleep. Rain taps lightly against the bedroom window, and the grandfather clock downstairs marks the passing hours like a slow heartbeat. Ta zara zara am, then thra, zara zara am, then nearly fa, zara zara am. I finally give up on pretending to sleep, wrap myself in Richard's old grey cardigan and head downstairs. The house is terrifyingly quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. I make a cup of tea I don't really want and sit at the kitchen table, stare up and down the dark hallway that leads to Richard's study. Lately, that room has felt dangerous. Every time I walk in, memories are waiting for me. His laugh, his voice, the way he used to hum while balancing the books at his desk. Sometimes grief softens with time and sometimes it cuts sharper. That night it pierces right through me. Without even fully thinking about why I am doing it, I walk into the study and pull open the very bottom drawer of Richard's desk. Inside sits a stack of unused stationery embossed with our old family address. Richard bought it years ago because he believed handwritten letters mattered. People hold onto letters, he used to say. Nobody holds onto a text message. I slowly bring the paper back to the kitchen table. Then I start writing, not legal documents, not instructions for a will, but letters, a letter to each of my children. At first I don't know what I want to say, but the moment the pen touches the paper, the words pour out like an open wound. I start with Uthan. Dear Uthan, do you remember the winter your father worked 18 days in a row just because the fee for your school trip to Washington, D.C. was more than we could afford? You cried because you thought you couldn't go with your classmates. Your father sold his fishing boat to pay for that trip. You never knew. Tears instantly blur my vision. I stop writing and cover my mouth with a trembling hand. Uthan really would never know. Richard never wanted the kids to carry guilt for our sacrifices. Neither did I. Maybe that was our mistake. Maybe children should know exactly how much love costs. I slowly continue writing. When you were 12, I took a second job cleaning offices at night just to save for your college fund. I used to come home at zara zara am and still get up at zara zara am to make your breakfast for school. I never regretted it, not once. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a liability to be managed. The words hurt so much I almost want to cross them out, but I leave them there because they are true. By the time the sun comes up, Uthan's letter is 6 pages long. Melissa's letter takes even longer. Dear Melissa, when you were little, you used to crawl onto my lap every time it thundered. You said my voice made the world feel safe. I still remember that pink blanket you dragged everywhere until it fell apart. I remember every dance recital, every heartbreak, every fever. I remember holding your hand when you gave birth to Oliver because you were terrified something would go wrong. You used to tell me I was your best friend. What happened to us? That question almost breaks me, because unlike Uthan's cold ambition or Jason's explosive anger, Melissa's betrayal feels quieter and more personal. She knows how to sound loving while slowly chipping away at my dignity. Her performative kindness hurts more because a part of me still wants to believe it is real. Writing to Jason is the hardest of all. I stare at the blank paper for nearly 20 minutes before writing a single word. Dear Jason, your father loved you to a fault, even when you made your worst mistakes, especially when you made your worst mistakes. You were always the child who needed Ruskan the most, and maybe we rescued you too many times. Maybe every time we shielded you from consequences, we inadvertently taught you that someone would always be there to clean up your mess. My tears drop onto the paper. I think about Jason at 6 years old, running through the backyard sprinkler. Jason at 16, crying over his first heartbreak. Jason sleeping on Richard's shoulder during long car rides. How does a mother reconcile those beautiful memories with the angry man shouting profanities over an inheritance in her living room? I still don't know. By the time the sun is fully up, I have finished all the letters. 3 envelopes sit on the kitchen table next to my cold tea, unaddressed, unsealed. I am not ready to send them yet. Maybe I never will be. Around noon, the front doorbell rings unexpectedly. I quickly wipe my face and open it. Oliver is standing there, holding a paper grocery bag, still wearing her scrubs from the podiatric clinic. The moment she sees my face, her expression turns to deep concern. "Grandma, have you been crying?" I almost lie, but I just step aside in silence. Oliver walks in carefully, as if entering a fragile space. "I brought some soup," she says softly, "and those little blueberry muffins you like." Somehow that almost breaks my defenses completely, not because of the food but because she remembered. No one else remembers the small things anymore. Not Ethan, not Melissa, not Jason, only Oliver. As she unloads the bag in the kitchen, I quickly gather the letters and slide them under a magazine on the table. But Olivia notices anyway. "What's that?" "Oh," I say quickly, "nothing important." She doesn't press further. That is another thing that sets Olivia apart from the rest of the family. She knows how to respect silence. After lunch, she helps me trim the dead flowers in the backyard garden. The afternoon sun casts a soft, golden glow over the fence Richard built years ago. For the first time in weeks, I feel a sense of peace. Not because my problems are gone, but because someone is sitting beside me, asking for absolutely nothing in return. Olivia glanced around the yard, her expression softening. "My mom called me yesterday." My hand hovered over the rose bushes. "Oh." "She said you've been acting strange lately." There it was again, the narrative. Strange, confused, emotional. The net was already closing in around the family. I forced myself to stay calm. "And what do you think?" Olivia looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "I think you're heartbroken." Simple, honest, and accurate. Not mentally unstable, not losing my mind, just heartbroken. Tears immediately filled my eyes and I had to look away. Olivia instantly pulled off her gardening gloves. "Grandma." I quickly shook my head. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. After months of emotional manipulation, hearing someone finally see the truth was almost too much to bear. Olivia stepped closer and gently took my hand. "You know," she whispered, "you don't have to prove your worth to people who only show up when they need something from you." I stared at her, stunned. Somehow, this 24-year-old granddaughter of mine understood a lesson it had taken me nearly 70 years to learn. After Olivia left that night, I went back to the kitchen table and reread those letters. Page after page of memories, sacrifice, love, and pain. In that moment, I realized I wasn't really writing to my children. I was writing to the past versions of them, the ones I had already lost. The little boy who used to hold my hand tightly when crossing the street. The little girl who thought thunderstorms would disappear if I just held her close. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. Those children were gone. Maybe it was time I finally accepted that reality. I slowly folded each letter, put them back into their envelopes, and locked them away in Richard's desk. Not sent, not destroyed, just waiting, like the last remaining fragments of a family that no longer knew how to be honest with each other. Deep down, I already sensed that a storm was brewing, because my children still believed they were fighting over money that belonged to them. They had no idea how much everything had already changed. The family meeting took place on a Sunday. Of course it was a Sunday. Richard had always believed Sunday was a sacred day for family. Growing up, the kids knew that no matter how busy life got, Sunday dinner meant everyone came home. I think that was what made that afternoon so incredibly painful. They took something Richard loved and turned it into a negotiation over my mortality. Ethan had called me 3 days earlier. "We all need to sit down and talk," he said carefully. "The tension in the family has become unhealthy." The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Tension, as if greed was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding. I came close to saying no, but Benjamin advised me to keep my composure and let them reveal their true colors. "When given enough room, people eventually show you exactly who they are," he told me over the phone, especially when money is involved. So on Sunday afternoon, I cooked dinner again. Not because anyone deserved the meal, but because some habits run too deep in a mother's bones to be erased overnight. By 4:00 p.m. the roast chicken was warm in the oven, the mashed potatoes steamed on the stove, fresh rolls were cooling under a kitchen towel. I moved slowly through the house, listening to the familiar silence. For a brief second I imagined Richard standing right behind me. He would have hated this, not just the arguing but the utter lack of respect. Richard could tolerate almost anything, except cruelty to family. Right at 5:00 p.m. Ethan arrived, on the dot, always in control, always prepared. He walked into the house with a slim leather folder tucked under his arm. That single detail spoke volumes. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a business meeting. Melissa arrived next, anxious yet overly affectionate. Jason was the last to show up, and thankfully he hadn't been drinking. Olivia came too, quietly slipping into the kitchen to help me carry the dishes without being asked. "You don't have to do all this yourself," she whispered. I forced a small smile. "No, I need to do this." Dinner itself was agonizing. At first no one openly argued, but a thick layer of tension lurked beneath every conversation. Ethan barely touched his food. Melissa nervously looked back and forth between everyone. Jason drank his water too quickly. Only Olivia acted normal. At one point, she started talking about a little girl at the pediatric clinic who insisted on wearing a superhero cape to every appointment. For a beautiful 30 seconds, a wave of laughter broke out across the table. Real laughter, a human moment. Then Ethan cleared his throat, and the warmth died instantly. "I think we need to discuss some important matters." Here it was, the meeting was officially in session. I slowly set my fork down. Jason leaned back heavily in his chair, finally getting to the point. Melissa shot him a warning glare. Ethan calmly opened the leather folder. "I've been trying to avoid conflict," he began, using that smooth business tone he used at the bank, "but we need to figure out the next steps." Figure out, phrasing something so deeply personal so coldly. I didn't say a word. Ethan continued, "Mom is getting older." Older, never Addison, never Mom, just older. She shouldn't have to carry the stress of managing all of this alone. Melissa nodded cautiously. "We're just worried about you." "No," I said to myself silently, "you are worried about my money." Jason crossed his arms over his chest. "Can we stop pretending? This is about the inheritance." The word slammed onto the dinner table. Inheritance. Olivia looked appalled. Melissa let out a dramatic sigh. "Jason." "What?" he shot back aggressively. "It's exactly what everyone is thinking." Ethan rubbed his forehead in annoyance. "This is why we need a proper structure." Then he turned directly to me. "Mom, have you updated your estate planning?" The room fell into a dead silence. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly sounded louder. Tick, tick, tick. I carefully folded my napkin before answering. "Yes, I have." 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me instantly. Ethan leaned slightly forward. "With Benjamin?" "Yes." Jason spoke up next. "What happens to the house?" Straight to the point. "No, how have you been? No, what do you want? Just the house." I looked around the dining room slowly. This was the room where Richard taught Ethan how to carve a Thanksgiving turkey. This was the room where Melissa blew out her birthday candles every year. This was the room where Jason once spilled grape juice all over the wall and cried for an hour because he was afraid I wouldn't love him anymore. And now they sat here, discussing it like an inventory list. Melissa forced a dry, artificial smile. "We just want to avoid any mess down the road." There it was again, that word, mess. I looked right at her. "There doesn't seem to be any mess about what you all want." No one replied. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "Someone has to get the house eventually." Ethan countered immediately. "It should stay in the family." Jason scoffed. "You mean it should go to you because at least you can afford the upkeep, right?" "Oh please, you just want the property value," Melissa cut in quickly. "Maybe we should just sell it and split it equally." Equally, what an ugly word that can be sometimes, because love is never split equally. Sacrifice isn't measured in percentages, neither is parenting. Jason pointed at Melissa. "You'd sell this place within a week and probably use it to pay off your debts." "I don't have debts," Ethan fired back angrily. "You lose money on everything you touch, give me a break," Jason snapped. "Everyone enough," Melissa yelled. Then she turned to me, putting on that practiced look of concern. "Mom, you see what I mean? This kind of arguing is exactly why you need to clarify your wishes. Always about management, always about control, never about grief, never about love." I intentionally stayed silent. Benjamin was right. Given enough room, people reveal exactly who they are, and my children were exposing everything. Ethan reopened his folder. Actually, I've drawn up a draft of a potential distribution plan. My stomach turned. You drew up what? A fair structure, he replied calmly, just as a starting point. He pushed several sheets of paper across the table. They contained actual percentages, asset categories, and property projections. My entire life had been simplified into a spreadsheet. Olivia stared at the documents in disbelief. Are you serious right now? Ethan ignored her. Jason angrily grabbed one of the pages. What is this garbage? Your financial situation is unstable, Ethan replied coldly. Naturally, there need to be certain protective clauses. Jason slammed his hands on the table and stood up. Protective clauses? You arrogant jerk, you'd burn through your share in 6 months. At least I have the decency to admit I want the money. Melissa jumped up too. Oh my God, stop fighting. Suddenly the whole room erupted. Jason was shouting, Ethan was yelling back, and Melissa was crying dramatically. The voices clashed so intensely that they didn't even sound human anymore. It was just noise, greed, entitlement, and hunger. And through it all, no one asked what I wanted. No one asked what I cared about. No one wondered if it broke my heart to sit there and listen to my own children divide my existence into percentages. Then Ethan said something that completely tore away the very last piece of my patience. Mom, we deserve transparency here. Deserve? I stared at my son in utter disbelief. You deserve transparency. Yes, he said firmly, we are your children. The room quieted down again. For the first time in months I felt entirely clear. I slowly stood up from the table. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice was completely steady. You want transparency? Ethan nodded cautiously. Yes. I looked at each of my children, at their tense faces and greedy eyes, seeing the fear of losing what they already considered theirs. Then I said softly, fine. Everyone froze. None of them realized that I was finally about to tell them the truth. The silence that followed my words was almost electric. For a brief moment, nobody moved or spoke. Even Jason slowly sat back down, narrowing his eyes in confusion. Ethan was the first to regain his composure. He sat up a bit straighter, clearly under the impression that he had finally pressured me into cooperating. Good, he said cautiously. I think honesty is best for everyone. Honesty, I almost laughed, because honesty was exactly what they were about to face. I remained standing at the head of the table, looking down at my children. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of them. Heartbroken, yes. Still grieving the family we used to be, absolutely, but afraid, no, because after traveling this road, grief had burned away all my self-deception. Clarity is a powerful thing. I carefully folded my hands together. You want transparency, I repeated softly. Then let's have some transparency. Ethan nodded. Melissa looked nervous now. Jason appeared impatient. Olivia sat completely still, watching me with concern. I took a deep breath. A few months ago, I went to see Benjamin Carter. Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. Of course it did. He had suspected Benjamin was involved all along. I updated my estate planning documents, I continued. Melissa swallowed hard. Jason crossed his arms again. How much money are we talking about here? He interrupted. Olivia looked disgusted. Uncle Jason. No, I stopped her gently. Let him speak. I wanted them to hear exactly how ugly they sounded. Jason looked directly at me. We have a right to know where things stand. A right, I nodded slowly. Then let me tell you. I walked toward Richard's old study, and everyone's eyes followed me. In the desk drawer sat a slim blue folder containing copies of the finalized transfer documents, trust agreements, asset reallocations, and charitable foundation records. When I brought it back to the dining room, my hands shook slightly. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew this moment would change my family forever. I slowly sat down and placed the folder on the table. Ethan immediately leaned forward. What is that? My final decision. The room went quiet again. I carefully opened the folder. Over the past few months, I said calmly, I have transferred the vast majority of my financial assets into a charitable trust. At first nobody reacted. The statement seemed too large for their minds to process right away. Then Jason blinked. What? Melissa frowned. What kind of trust? I looked right at them. A foundation that provides housing and support for older women who have been abandoned or financially exploited by their families. The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan just stared at me. Jason let out a dry chuckle as if he had misheard. Then he said, "You're joking." "I am not joking." Melissa's face turned pale. "Exactly how much money are you talking about?" I answered honestly, "The vast majority." The explosion happened in an instant. "What do you mean, the vast majority?" Jason shouted. Ethan grabbed the folder off the table, aggressively flipping through the pages. "No," he muttered to himself. No, this is impossible." Melissa looked like she was about to faint. "You gave away our inheritance." "There it was, not your money, not Dad's life savings. It was our inheritance." I looked at her quietly. "It was never yours." Jason slammed his hands on the table. "Are you out of your mind?" Olivia let out a soft gasp. "Uncle Jason," but Jason had completely lost control. "You gave millions to strangers." "They aren't strangers," I replied calmly. "They are people who need help." "We need help too." I stared at him in disbelief. "You need $80,000 to cover up your poor choices. I am your mother." "And I am your son," Jason bellowed. "And I am your mother," I countered sharply, shocking even myself with the strength in my voice. The room instantly froze. For months I had been quiet, gentle, and cautious, but something inside me had finally broken through. I looked directly at my 3 children. "Do you know what none of you have asked tonight?" No one answered. "You never asked if I was happy." Silence. "You never asked what I cared about." Melissa began to sob softly, but I kept going. "You sat in my house, right in front of me, fighting over my money while I am still alive." Ethan finally looked up from the documents, visibly furious. "You made this decision emotionally." "No," I countered calmly. "I made this decision after months of clarity." "You were manipulated." The accusation arrived exactly as Benjamin had predicted. I nodded slowly. "There it is." Ethan's voice sharpens. "Mom, this is why major financial decisions shouldn't be made during a period of grief." I let out a soft laugh of disbelief. "Grief," I said quietly. "You think grief made me do this?" "Yes." "No, Ethan," my voice began to shake. "Your actions forced me to do this." The statement hit heavily. For a brief second, a flicker of guilt crossed Melissa's face. Jason just looked enraged. Ethan remained cold and controlled, a dangerous kind of control. He slid the papers back onto the table. "This will can be challenged in court." That sentence chilled the entire room. Olivia looked at him in horror. "Are you threatening Grandma?" "I'm protecting this family," Ethan snapped. "No," I countered softly. "You're protecting the money." His expression hardened instantly. That money belonged to Dad too, and if Dad heard this conversation tonight he would be ashamed. The words were intentionally meant to sting. Good. For once I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had inflicted on me. Melissa wiped the tears from her cheeks. "How could you do this to us?" The question left me speechless. To them, she hadn't considered for a single second what they had done to me. I looked closely at my daughter. "Do you remember my birthday dinner?" Her face changed immediately. "That's not fair. You discussed my passing right in front of me. We were just trying to responsibly plan for the future." "No," I cut her off gently. "You were dividing up my life like an inventory list." Jason suddenly pushed his chair back violently. "This is unbelievable." He began packing around the dining room. "You'd rather give everything to strangers than your own flesh and blood." I looked at him sadly. "I'd rather help people who know how to be grateful." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stopped packing. "Wow," he let out a bitter laugh. "Wow." Olivia finally spoke up softly. "Grandma, are you okay?" There it was, the only question carrying real concern from anyone all night. Tears instantly filled my eyes. After everything, in a room full of my own children, only my granddaughter still saw me as a person. "I think I finally am," I whispered softly. Ethan stood up abruptly. "This isn't over." The threat hung heavily in the room. Melissa looked terrified now, and Jason was seething. Yet strangely I felt at peace. Not because I enjoyed hurting my children, God knows I didn't. Every second of this felt like mourning people who were still alive. But deep down, I understood an undeniable reality. For the first time in months, the truth was out in the open on this table. No masks, no fake concern, no manipulative kindness. Just the truth, and it was ugly. Ethan glared at me coldly. You chose strangers over your own family. I looked directly into my oldest son's eyes, answering with the deepest honesty I had left. No, Ethan, my voice trembled slightly. I chose the people who still remember how to love. The room fell into an absolute crushing silence, and somewhere deep inside I knew there was no going back. After I said those words, a long, heavy silence stretched over the room. No one moved and no one spoke. Then Ethan let out a cold sneer, not because anything was funny, but because he was far past the point of pretending anymore. You've completely lost your judgment, he said quietly. Judgment, what a grand word to dress up disrespect. I sat calmly at the table, watching my children look at me like I was a traitor. Not one of them was heartbroken over losing me. They were only heartbroken over losing the money. That realization weighed heavily on my heart. Melissa finally spoke through her tears. Mom, please tell me this isn't final. I looked at her closely. It is final. Jason muttered a curse under his breath and started packing again. No, there's no way this is legal. It is legal, I replied softly. Ethan looked up instantly. You've already transferred the funds. Yes. How much? All of it? His jaw tightened sharply. Answer me. For a brief moment I saw something in my oldest son that I had never truly seen before. It wasn't care and it wasn't grief. It was panic, real panic, because the money he had already envisioned controlling was gone. I transferred the vast majority of the liquid assets months ago, I said, choosing my words deliberately. The trust is active and legally protected. Jason slammed his hand against the wall. You didn't have the right to do that. The statement shocked me. The right, I looked directly at him, the right to decide where my own money goes. You know exactly what I mean. No, I said calmly, I don't think I do. Ethan stood up suddenly. We need to get Benjamin involved immediately. I almost smiled. He's already involved. The room went quiet again. Then, as if summoned by the sheer tension, the front doorbell rang. Everyone froze in place. I already knew who it was. Benjamin Carter walked in quietly, carrying a slim black briefcase and wearing his dark wool overcoat. The moment Ethan saw him, his face turned pale. You. Benjamin closed the door calmly. Good evening, Ethan. Jason pointed an angry finger at him. You're the one who helped her do this. Benjamin's expression remained perfectly composed. I assisted Addison in executing her lawful wishes. Melissa wiped a tear from her cheek. She wasn't in her right mind. Benjamin looked directly at her. No, she was entirely clear. The firmness in his voice instantly cut through the noise in the room. Ethan took a step forward. She made major financial decisions under severe emotional distress. Benjamin didn't even blink. I anticipated that accusation. That sentence tightened every nerve in the room. Benjamin calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. Medical evaluations, signed certificates of competency, witness statements, dates, legal records, every safeguard possible. He laid them out neatly on the dining table. Before any assets were transferred, Benjamin explained composedly, Addison underwent a comprehensive cognitive and psychological evaluation conducted by independent physicians. Jason stared at him in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. No, Benjamin continued. She was found to be fully cognitive, of sound mind, and legally capable of making all financial decisions independently. Ethan aggressively snatched up one of the papers. This is ridiculous. No, Benjamin replied softly, it's thorough. For the first time that night I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Ethan's face. It wasn't guilt, it was fear. His strategy was collapsing in real time. Melissa looked completely crushed now. You actually thought we would accuse you of being unstable. No one answered her because we all knew the truth. Yes, they absolutely would have. Benjamin turned slowly toward Ethan. In fact, he said, choosing his words with care, your mother specifically requested the competency evaluation because she was concerned family members might attempt a legal challenge. The revelation landed like a bombshell. Ethan's expression turned dark. "You're painting us as predators." I spoke up before Benjamin could answer. "No, Ethan," my voice trembled slightly. "You did that to yourselves." Silence consumed the room once more. Jason rubbed his face hard. "This is insane." Benjamin looked at him calmly. "No, what's insane is pressuring a grieving widow to surrender control of her life's work." Jason glared at him bitterly. "You don't know anything about this family." Benjamin's expression changed. For the first time all evening, a flash of genuine anger appeared in his eyes. "I knew your father for 40 years. The room went completely quiet. Benjamin took a deep breath and continued. "Richard Clark worked himself to the bone to build security for this family. He built security, not entitlement." Those words visibly struck my 3 children. Good, someone finally said it out loud. Melissa began to cry harder. "I never wanted it to be like this." I looked at her sadly. "Then why did you keep asking about my money?" She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. There was no answer because there was no excuse. Jason turned back to me. "So what now?" he questioned bitterly. "You're leaving us with nothing." With nothing, the phrase cut through me painfully. With nothing. As if love, education, opportunities, decades of sacrifice, and a lifetime of support counted as absolutely nothing the moment the remaining money was reduced. A profound exhaustion washed over me. "For 40 years I gave you everything I had," I whispered softly. No one responded. My eyes began to burn. "I gave up sleep, I gave up vacations, I gave up dreams, and I gave up time alone with your father. We built our entire lives around giving the 3 of you a better future." My voice caught. "And somehow, all you can think about now is what else you deserve." Melissa looked down at the floor. Jason avoided my gaze. Only Ethan remained stiff, cold, and calculating. Then, he asked the question I knew he had been holding on to all night. "How much is left?" The bluntness of the question stunned even Benjamin. I stared at my son. Even now, after everything, it was still about the money, the numbers, the assets. No apology, no remorse, just calculations. "Enough for me to live comfortably," I replied calmly. "That's not what I asked." "I know." The silence between us felt sharp enough to cut skin. Finally, Olivia spoke up gently. "Mom, Uncle Ethan, Uncle Jason." Everyone looked at her. Her eyes were filled with tears now too. "She is still your mother." That sentence nearly broke me. In a room full of my own children, only my granddaughter still treated me as a living, breathing human being. Melissa broke down completely, sobbing openly. It wasn't dramatic, it was real, messy, and full of shame. For a brief second I wondered if something inside her had finally cracked open. But Ethan remained unmoved. He slowly stacked the copies of the legal documents. "This changes things," he said blankly. Benjamin nodded calmly. "Yes, it certainly does." Ethan looked right at me. "You've destroyed this family forever." The accusation hurt, not because it was true, but because a part of me still feared it might be. I stared at my son for a few seconds before answering quietly, "No, Ethan." My voice was barely a whisper. "This family was destroyed long before I changed my will." A final silence settled over the room. Deep down, I think everyone sitting at that table knew I was right. After Benjamin left that night, the house felt colder than ever. Not physically cold, but emotionally. It felt as though something sacred had finally shattered into pieces that could never be repaired. Nobody spoke for several minutes after the front door closed. The dining room was frozen in silence. Half-eaten food sat untouched on the plates. Wine glasses caught the dim light from the kitchen. These were the remains of a family dinner. Jason finally grabbed his jacket roughly. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. Then he looked right at me. "You chose strangers over your own flesh and blood." I didn't have the emotional energy left to argue. "I chose kindness," I replied calmly. Jason let out a bitter laugh. "Good luck with that." He marched to the front door and slammed it hard enough to rattle the frames on the hallway wall. The sound echoed through the house for a long time before fading. Melissa remained at the table, sobbing quietly into a tissue. A part of me instinctively wanted to comfort her. No matter how much damage had been done, that old maternal instinct still lived inside me. But another part of me finally understood an important truth. A mother cannot heal the wounds her children continuously choose to inflict. Ethan stood by the window staring out into the dark, entirely expressionless, or at least pretending to be. That frightened me more than Jason's anger. Rage eventually burns out, coldness does not. Finally, Ethan turned around, and the house. The words felt like a physical blow to my chest, not because of the structure itself, but because even now, after everything, he was still fixated on assets, ownership, and inheritance. Olivia looked horrified. Uncle Ethan. What? He snapped back. It matters. Then he looked directly at me. What happens to this property? I closed my eyes briefly. Here it was, the final piece of the puzzle, the last illusion they were desperately holding on to. I slowly stood up from the table and walked over to the living room fireplace. Hanging above it was my favorite photograph of Richard. It was from a lake trip 30 years ago. He was smiling, sunburned, holding up a fish. He looked so alive in that photo, so full of hope. I stared at his face before speaking. When I pass away, this house will not belong to any of you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa slowly lowered her tissue. What? I turned to face them carefully. I already signed the transfer paperwork for the house. For the first time all evening, Ethan looked genuinely stunned. You gave away the house too? Yes. To whom? Melissa asked, her voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard. To the foundation. Nobody moved. You couldn't even hear anyone breathe. I kept my voice soft. When I pass away, this place will become transitional housing for older women who have been left with nowhere else to go. If Jason had exploded earlier, Ethan's reaction now felt much worse because his anger arrived quietly. A dangerous, cold quiet. You gave away our childhood home. No, I didn't do that, I said, looking at them. I'm saving it, but I could already tell that none of them could understand. I slowly looked around the living room. Richard's books were still lined up on the shelves. Family photos covered every wall. The piano Melissa used to practice on sat quietly by the stairs. This house was filled with decades of love, and I refused to let it become a trophy in another battle over money. It will still be a home, I said softly. Melissa stared at me in disbelief. For strangers, for women who just need a safe place. If Jason was still here, he probably would have lost his temper again. Ethan scoffed from the doorway. So this is how it ends. Dad worked his entire life for this family, and you just hand it all over to anyone else. That comment strung something deep inside me. I walked toward him slowly. Your father worked his entire life because he believed that a home meant protecting people. Ethan was the first to look away. For the first time in months, he actually looked away. Then Ethan asked the question I knew was coming. Who is going to manage all of this? I hesitated for a moment because this part was important, maybe more important than anything. Finally, I answered calmly, Olivia. The room froze completely. Olivia's eyes went wide instantly. What? Melissa snapped her head up, standing up abruptly. You put Olivia in charge. It's temporary oversight alongside a board of directors, I explained gently. She's going to help handle the daily operations and community outreach. Melissa looked as though she had been hit over the head. You didn't even mention this to me before consulting my daughter. No, Olivia cut in quickly. I had absolutely no idea. She looked genuinely shocked. That mattered to me, because out of everyone in this room, Olivia was the only one who had never asked me for a single thing, not once. Ethan slowly rubbed his jaw. His voice became terribly calm. So, let me get this straight. You strip your own children of their inheritance, and then you hand the authority over to a 24-year-old. I looked directly at him. I gave the responsibility to the only person in this family who shows kindness without expecting to be paid for it. The words landed heavily. Melissa began to sob openly again. This is so humiliating. No, I replied softly. What's truly humiliating is fighting over a mother's money while she is still alive. Nobody answered because there was nothing they could say. Olivia suddenly looked overwhelmed. Grandma, I don't know if I can do this. I walked over and gently took her hands in mine. Of course you can. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. You know how to see people, I whispered. That is worth so much more than money. Silence settled over the room once more. Then Melissa, still crying, spoke up suddenly. Do you really think we are such terrible people now? The question cut my heart, because a part of me still wished the answer could be simpler. I think grief and money brought out the worst in all of us, even me, especially me. Because despite everything, standing there, I still felt a heavy wave of guilt. Guilt for protecting myself, guilt for hurting my children, guilt for finally choosing my own dignity after a lifetime of sacrifice. But beneath the guilt there was something stronger now. Peace. It was small and fragile but incredibly real. I don't even recognize you anymore, Ethan said, shaking his head slowly. I looked at him sadly. No, Ethan, you're just finally seeing me as a person instead of a solution. That silenced him instantly. He picked up his coat without a word. Before leaving, he paused at the front door. You know what the saddest part is, he said quietly. I waited. You actually think this money can fix people who are broken? I looked directly at my oldest son. No, I replied softly. I think kindness might. For a split second, a flash of something crossed his face again. It wasn't anger, it was pain, real pain, then it vanished. He walked out without even saying goodbye. Melissa left shortly after, tears streaming down her face all the way to her car. Suddenly, the house went completely quiet. Only Olivia and I were left standing in the living room, surrounded by decades of memories. For a long time, neither of us spoke, then Olivia hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her just like I did when she was a little girl. For the first time in months, I let myself cry completely, not because I regretted my decision, but because deep down, I finally understood a heartbreaking reality. Sometimes, saving yourself means you have to accept the fact that the people you love might never forgive you for refusing to let them use you anymore. That night, I realized my children might be gone for good. After that evening, my children went completely silent. There were no phone calls from Ethan, no dramatic check-ins from Melissa, no late-night visits from Jason. At first, the quiet hurt more than the arguments. For 40 years, being a mother had shaped every part of my life. My days used to revolve around lunch boxes, school concerts, doctor appointments, college tuition, weddings, heartbreaks, and emergencies. Then suddenly nothing, no noise, no chaos, just the silence echoing through a house full of memories. The first few mornings felt unbearable. I would wake up automatically, expecting messages or missed calls, but there was nothing. Sometimes I found myself staring at my phone for long periods, hesitating to reach out to them. Maybe to apologize, maybe to explain things one more time. That old instinct to fix everything was still alive inside me. But every single time I remembered the dining room, the spreadsheets, the percentages, and the entitlement. Then, slowly and painfully, I began to understand an important truth. Peace bought at the expense of your dignity isn't love, it's surrender. So instead of calling my children, I started slowly putting the pieces of my own life back together. Just small pieces, the kinds of things most people wouldn't even notice. I started taking early morning walks again. Richard used to love the early mornings. He always said the world felt more real before noon. Some days, wrapped in a thick coat, I walked through the neighborhood park, watching winter slowly fade and spring quietly arrive. Other mornings I sat on a bench, drinking coffee from a paper cup, watching ducks make their way across the frozen pond. For the first time in years my mind felt quiet. It wasn't happiness. Healing doesn't mean happiness right away. Healing is learning how to breathe again after drowning emotionally. Olivia came to see me often. She never brought any questions, she never pushed. Sometimes she just brought groceries, sometimes a cup of coffee, sometimes nothing but herself. One afternoon, we were planting flowers together in the backyard, the sunlight falling softly over the garden. You look a lot more peaceful lately, she said cautiously. I smiled faintly. I think I finally learned the difference between loneliness and peace. She looked thoughtful for a moment. What's the difference? Loneliness hurts, I said softly, but peace heals. The words surprised even me because they were true. For months, I thought I was afraid of losing my children, but what I was truly afraid to admit was that they had stopped treating me with love long before my will ever changed. About 3 weeks after the family meeting, Melissa finally called. I stared at her name on the screen for nearly a full minute before answering. Hello. Silence, then a shaky breath. Hi, Mom, her voice sounded much smaller. no longer smooth, no longer rehearsed, just full of exhaustion. "How have you been?" I asked carefully. Another pause, then she let out a weak laugh. "I don't think you really want to hear the answer to that." The honesty caught me off guard. At first the conversation was awkward. The weather, work, Olivia, safe topics. But eventually Melissa's voice cracked. "I've been so angry." "I know. No, I mean really, truly angry." I sat quietly in Richard's old chair, listening. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "But I've also been so ashamed." My chest tightened instantly, because shame means an awakening. It meant that beneath all the greed and fear, maybe a piece of humanity remained. Melissa began to weep softly. "I don't even know how I became this person." Tears instantly found my eyes because I didn't know either. "I was just so scared," she admitted. "After Dad died, everything felt so unstable." I listened in silence. "Daniel's business hasn't been doing well," she continued. "The mortgage, the kids' tuition. I kept thinking if anything happened to you, at least we would have a safety net." A safety net. What a human word, not greed but fear. For the first time in months I saw something deeper behind her actions. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. "I understand feeling scared," I said softly. Melissa cried harder. "But that doesn't justify how we treated you." No, of course it didn't, but hearing her finally say it meant more than she probably realized. We talked for nearly an hour. It wasn't perfect, and there was no miraculous reconciliation, but it was honest, and honesty felt like sunlight breaking through after being trapped underground for months. Ethan still refused any contact. Benjamin told me he had briefly consulted another attorney, but apparently dropped the idea of legal action afterward. It didn't surprise me. The legal documents were ironclad. But more than that, I think Ethan ultimately realized that challenging me publicly would only expose the ugliness to the world. Jason completely vanished for a while. Then, on a rainy evening, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper. "Mom, I'm still angry, but I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately. I guess we forgot that he cared about people far more than money. I don't know if I'm ready to talk yet, but I wanted you to know I read the letters Olivia told me about. I'm sorry for some of the things I said. Jason." I stared at that note for a long, long time, not because it fixed everything. It didn't, but because it proved something important. Sometimes people can only hear the truth after they lose access to the things they thought mattered most. A month later, Diane invited me to view the first completed housing unit at the foundation. The old transitional rooms looked completely different now. Fresh paint, new furniture, warm lighting, and real beds instead of temporary cots. The women in the hallways, whose faces used to carry absolute despair, were now smiling. One resident, after learning about the donation, hugged me tightly. "You have no idea what this place means to us," she whispered through tears. But I did know because, in a way, helping them saved me too. Diane and I walked side by side through the renovated building. "You look lighter," she observed. I thought about it, then nodded slowly. I spent a lifetime believing that love meant endless sacrifice. I looked down the hall, watching a few women laughing quietly near the communal kitchen. Now I think love requires boundaries too. Diane smiled gently. "That's wisdom, Addison. Most people learn it too late." Maybe she was right, or perhaps pain just teaches the lessons that comfort never can. That evening, I returned home just before sunset. The golden light rested on the front porch Richard built decades ago. I stood there looking at it for a long time before pulling out my keys. The house was still much quieter than it used to be, still empty, but the suffocating heavy dark was gone. It didn't feel oppressive anymore. There was only peace. For the first time in a very long time, I stopped waiting for my children to become who they used to be, because deep down, I had come to understand a difficult but freeing lesson. You can't force people to love you the right way. You can only decide whether you're going to keep allowing them to hurt you. At 68 years old, I finally chose myself. 6 months later, I stood in front of a building that had once been abandoned. Now it carried a brand new sign, "Clark House, a safe place to begin again." For a moment I could barely breathe. The morning sun hit the front windows, and volunteers were moving tables and flowers, preparing for the opening ceremony. A few women stood near the entrance, smiling nervously, holding coffee cups with trembling hands. Several of them had moved in weeks ago. Others were just arriving from shelters, hospitals, and temporary housing programs. Every person here carried a story of loss, betrayal, fear, and survival. Standing in the crisp early spring air, I realized something that brought tears to my eyes. Richard would have absolutely loved this place. Not because his name was on the building, but because it gave people back their dignity. That was always who he was. Diane walked toward me holding a clipboard, a bright smile on her face. Ready. I let out a soft chuckle out of nervousness. Not even close. Yes, you are, she squeezed my hand gently. You've already done the hardest part. Maybe she was right. The hardest part wasn't signing the papers. It wasn't the legal meetings or the family arguments. The hardest part was accepting the fact that protecting myself didn't mean I was being selfish. It took me nearly 70 years to learn that. Inside the building, volunteers filled long folding tables with pastries and coffee, and soft music played from the ceiling speakers. The atmosphere felt warm and alive, nothing like the cold, tense energy that used to fill my own dining room. A woman named Patricia, the former bakery owner I had met months ago, walked slowly toward me with the help of her cane. When she saw me, her eyes immediately welled with tears. You really did it, she whispered. I hugged her carefully. No, I replied softly, we did it together. Patricia shook her head. You gave us a second chance. The sentence almost broke me, because for a long time I thought my money only meant conflict, pain, and division. But here, for the first time, it stood for safety, healing, and hope. As guests slowly filtered into the building, I noticed Olivia standing near the hallway, helping a resident carry blankets into her room. When she caught my eye, she turned and smiled. God, I loved that girl. Not because she supported my decision, but because she cared about people from the bottom of her heart. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just kindness. And in the end, kindness always matters more than bloodlines. The ceremony began around noon. Diane spoke first, talking about older adult exploitation, abandonment, and the growing number of older women who find themselves facing financial hardship after losing a spouse. A few local reporters were there, along with community leaders, volunteers, and social workers. But strangely, standing among these strangers felt more genuine than many family gatherings I had attended recently. Then Diane called my name. My hands started shaking immediately. I'm not giving a speech, I whispered. Yes, you are, she replied firmly. So, I slowly walked to the front of the room as polite applause echoed through the space. For a second I froze entirely. Dozens of faces looked back at me. Some were hopeful, some emotional, others worn down by lives that had been much harder than my own. I gripped the podium and took a deep breath. My husband and I spent a lifetime building a business together, I began softly. The room went perfectly quiet. Like many couples, we thought success meant saving enough money to ensure our children would be comfortable long after we were gone. I swallowed hard. Chinese letter at some point along the way, I realized that if money doesn't leave kindness behind with it, it means absolutely nothing. Several women wiped tears from their eyes, and I did the same. I slowly looked around the room. In the months after my husband passed, I felt like I became invisible, not because I was alone, but because grief changes the way people look at you. My voice trembled. I learned a painful lesson. Growing older can make people feel forgotten, disposable, and powerless. Silence filled the entire building. But this place, I looked around carefully. This place exists to remind people that dignity doesn't disappear with age. Applause broke out softly throughout the room. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was incredibly sincere, and somehow that made it mean so much more. After the ceremony, people stayed and talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. An elderly woman hugged me tightly and whispered, I thought nobody saw us anymore. I cried in the restroom. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears of pure relief, the kind of tears that arrive when you finally drop an emotional burden you've carried for far too long. When I finally walked back out into the hallway, I froze. Melissa was standing near the main entrance entirely alone. She looked smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally, as if the last few months of life had completely smoothed away her sharp edges. For a second neither of us moved, then she slowly walked toward me. I almost didn't come, her voice shook terribly. I nodded quietly. I'm glad you did. Tears instantly filled her eyes. She looked around the building slowly before speaking again. I didn't understand before. No excuses, no manipulation, just honesty. It was enough. Melissa quickly wiped her face. After everything happened, I kept hearing the things we said to you that night playing over in my head. I stayed silent. Some wounds just take time to close. She looked right at me. We sounded absolutely terrible. The raw shame in her voice hurt my heart, not because I wanted revenge. No mother wants to watch her child drown in regret. I was just so terrified, she admitted softly. Terrified of money, terrified of life, terrified of losing stability, I knew. But that doesn't justify the way we treated you. Her voice broke completely, as if your value only depended on what you could leave behind for us. Tears instantly blurred my vision. For a few seconds, neither of us could speak. Then Melissa choked out the words I thought I would truly never hear in this lifetime. I'm sorry, Mom. No defensiveness, no performance, entirely real. God knows those words immediately healed something deep inside me. Not everything, some damage never completely disappears, but it was enough. I took a step forward and carefully wrapped my arms around her. Melissa wept on my shoulder just like she used to during thunderstorms when she was 7 years old. Suddenly, for the first time in years, I felt like she was my daughter again. Not the fear-driven woman blinded by an inheritance, just my daughter. When she finally looked up, she seemed a bit embarrassed about crying so much. I smiled gently. You still cry exactly the same way you did when you were 7. That made her laugh through her tears, a real smile. Later that evening, after the guests had all left, Olivia and I stood side by side outside Clark House, watching the setting sun paint the parking lot in gold. The air smelled of spring blossoms and fresh paint. Peace, finally peace. Olivia slid her arm gently through mine. Are you okay, Grandma? I looked up at the warm light glowing from the building carrying Richard's name. Inside, the women were laughing quietly over dinner. Safe, warm, seen. Deep down, I finally understood something clearly. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply stopped sacrificing myself to maintain broken patterns, and somehow that truth eventually guided all of us right here. I squeezed Olivia's hand gently, smiling through my tears as I whispered, yes, for the first time in a very long time I think I'm truly okay. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I would truly love to hear from you in the comments section below this video. What would you do if you were in Addison's shoes? Do you believe money reveals people's true nature? And wherever you are watching tonight, please tell me your city and local time. I read more comments than you think, and your stories mean the world to me.